I think if people could take their seats, I think we'll start in about 30 seconds or maybe less, so you really have to take your seats. Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Mark Schmidt. I'm the director of the Political Reform Program here at New America, and had the privilege of working with Bobby McKenzie for the last year or so on as this project and others have developed, which has been a real privilege and a pleasure. And I just want to start off by welcoming all of you to New America for this really important discussion of American attitudes about Muslims, both nationally and across a number of metro areas that I've learned a lot from just looking at the data, and I think that just we'll learn a lot more from the discussion that follows. So I just want to start off first by obviously thanking Bobby for organizing this, and you'll hear more from them. I want to particularly thank the American Muslim Institution for their collaboration on the project, and particularly Ambassador Aslam Siddiqui, Dr. Rahman, who's the chair of the board of the American Muslim Institution, and Shafiq Khan, who's also on the board of AMI. So it's been a great partnership here, and I also want to thank, I know there are other board members and guests of AMI, and I want to thank you all for coming and being a part of this project. When Bobby asked me to do this, I said, okay, it's an interesting fit with the kind of work that the Political Reform Program does, and I thought about it more, and thinking about yesterday, a young political scientist who works a lot with our program and who's presented here as well, named Alex Hertel-Fernandez, had an op-ed in the Times based on a study that he and some colleagues had done that was about just how little really, for example, congressional staffers knew about public opinion about key issues regarding immigration, climate change, and so forth. And there was a real gulf between what they thought public attitudes were and what public attitudes really are. And it was really a reminder to me, as a former congressional staffer, that we make a lot of assumptions. We make a lot of assumptions, obviously, about people, and we know that. But we also make a lot of assumptions about people's attitudes about issues and other people. And it's very, very difficult to really get at the real structure of public opinion and how you can work with it. And there's an old phrase in community organizing: you kind of have to meet people where they are, and understanding where people are when they think about Muslim Americans and whether it's people they've actually had contact with or people they imagine is really important and subtle. And I think this survey is a huge step forward to people who want to really understand where, what attitudes really are and where attitudes might be able to be changed or not, and begin to have a much more productive conversation that leads to better understanding, really addresses fear, misinformation, and hate, particularly in the light of recent events, but not bound by the news, because we're talking about a long future of learning to live in one diverse, complex country with a lot of where a lot of traditions come together in the most remarkable and important way. So, really think this is a wonderful contribution. I'm really glad that New America can be a part of it, and I look forward to learning more as the event goes forward. So, I think I'm turning it over now to Ambassador Siddiqui, right, to get things started. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Assalamu alaikum. Muslim peace of greeting to all of you. It's a pleasure for me to be here to be speaking to this august group. On behalf of the American Muslim Institution, I also would like to extend welcome to all of you, especially to our interfaith partners who are here in the room, and also Muslim community leaders from Virginia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. On a fine day and also working day to be seeing this many people, I especially thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to be here. Both Bobby and I are honored and overwhelmed by the number of people who have showed up here this afternoon. It shows that you care on the topic we are about to launch this survey, the results with you and share with you. At this point, I'd like to also have a point of privilege to introduce our chairman, Dr. Aqilur Rahman, and there are a couple of board members also, Qaisar Sharif, Shafiq Khan. Do I see Dr. Al-Gawari? He was in the back of the room. Thank you for being here. And I especially like to recognize our Executive Director of AMI, Shahid Rahman, who has done a great job in working with Bobby on this project. Where is Shahid? Shahid, please take him. Since New America needs no introduction, allow me to briefly talk about and introduce what is AMI, or American Muslim Institution. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit 501c organization based in Washington, D.C. since 2015. We are relatively very new and young. We believe in building greater understanding between American Muslims and fellow Americans by working together to create a more just, inclusive, and harmonious society that upholds our constitutional values. And also, our mission is to galvanize the American Muslim community to engage with their neighbors in order to get to know each other and also highlight the contributions Muslims make to America. Also to establish a greater dialogue and regular dialogue proactively with other elected leaders, our congressmen, senators, and appointed leaders, interfaith community and religions of different faiths in America, as well as the media. Our decision to partner with this study with New America, this nationwide survey, was based on our belief that American Muslims need to know how we are being perceived by fellow Americans. And also, that's not the end of it. Also, how we can change those perceptions from negative to positive. I will raise two questions. Was how many Americans know that about 10% of all medical doctors in America, about 25,000, are Muslims faith? Also, not very many people know that more than 16,000 Muslim Americans are serving in our armed forces, and we are all proud Americans, and this is what we are shouldering the same responsibility in defending this nation. AMI believes that all this which is happening since 9/11 in the proactive nature and activism which has come about among Muslims, more than 100 candidates ran this year for different offices in the U.S., all across the U.S. So, but we need to do a better job in terms of reaching out to our neighbors and decision makers, policy makers in the media, in terms of reaching out to explain what are American Muslim values, so that they know that American values are also Muslim values. In closing, I would like to thank Bobby McKenzie and the New America team for partnering with us, and we look for better, active, and proactive collaboration in the future. Also, I'd like to recognize some of the Islamic centers who were generously helped with us in terms of funding this study, and I'd like to name, if you happen to be here, please stand up. McLean Islamic Center, Muslim Association Virginia, Darul Hijra, Islamic Center Maryland, ICM, Al-Azhar Bloom Mosque. Thank you. And there are several donors, and this up to them, they want to stand up, but I think there are several generous donors who contributed to this project. Without their help, we would not have been able to fund this study, so I thank them all. So thank you, and at this time, it's my honor to welcome Bobby to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Bobby McKenzie. I'm a director and senior fellow here at New America. And in April 2016, I founded the Muslim Diaspora Initiative. And I founded this initiative after spending nearly 15 years working in and on North Africa and the Middle East, in large part because I thought there was a real need for scholarship and data to better understand what Muslim communities look like in the U.S. And so I'm working on two broad issues. One looks at the impact and contributions of Muslims at the local level. So what do the communities look like? What kinds of activities are they involved in? So for example, in Houston, there is a vibrant Hispanic Muslim community. There is a West African Muslim community, an Indian and Pakistani community, and so on. And very few people know about the differences with these communities. But as I was traveling across the country, talking to community members and telling them about this work, one of the things I kept hearing, and this was during the presidential election cycles, we think this is great to highlight the positives, but we don't were worried that there are a lot of negatives that are happening that people don't know about. And people started to give examples of a woman's veil being pulled off, a kid being bullied in school, discrimination in the workplace. And I heard this, and the researcher in me thought, maybe, but maybe it feels like it's worse than it is because maybe people are sharing the same incidents on social media, which is an echo chamber. And then that coupled with comments from people like Ted or Chris Christie, who said he wouldn't take in a 5-year-old orphan from Syria, suggesting there's something wrong with Muslims, may have amplified things. And so I pulled together a set of researchers, and we began to go through looking at 6 different categories, looking at anti-Muslim activities. And we went back to 2012, and we've collected nearly 800 incidents. And it's clear that the situation is quite bad at the state and local level. And so I offered that because I just wanted to echo Mark's important words about we need to understand what's happening. We need scholarship and data because this is how you actually move the needle. And so with that, I began talking with AMI, Ambassador Siddiqui, Dr. Rahman, Shafiq Khan, and Shahid Rahman about how to advance this sort of research. And we together, over the summer, decided on commissioning a national survey to look at public opinions of Muslims. And so the idea was to run the survey in the lead up to the midterms. And we wanted to run this as late as possible in the midterms. Why? Because that's a period when Muslims at the local, state, and federal level in many elections are front and center, and oftentimes not in a positive way. And so we ran this survey, and it went from October 2016 to October 2021. So it was just before the caravan was front and center on TV, and just before we started to hear about Middle Easterners, to use that quote, in the caravan. So it would not have captured that. But let me just show you what we did here. So 1,765 interviews were conducted. Of those, 1,165 were national, and then there were additionally 620 interviews that were oversamplings of four areas: the DMV area, Houston, Orlando, and Tampa. And we did the oversamplings because we wanted to get a sense of are there differences in different cities. For today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the national findings compared with the DMV area. So the good news is that Americans are largely accepting of Muslim Americans. Nearly all non-Muslim Americans agree that diversity is a good thing for America. And I should state one thing here. We only surveyed non-Muslims. So one of the first questions in the survey asks about religion. If somebody self-identifies as Muslim, we thank them for their time and say, we wish you well. So this survey is based on non-Muslim respondents. So nearly 85% of respondents agree that diversity is a good thing. A similar majority believe that their fellow Muslims contribute to the U.S. economy and society. And 2/3 also agree that it's a positive sign of progress for our country to have over 100 Muslim Americans run for political office. So these are all really positive signs. But if you contrast that with some of the other responses, only about half of non-Muslim Americans believe Islam is comparable with American values. Okay? So just to think about this, to compare that again, 85% of respondents believe that diversity is a good thing for America, but only 56% of Americans believe that Islam is compatible with American values. And it's equally interesting and troubling to see that only 60% of respondents think that Muslim Americans are as patriotic as other Americans. Where we saw most of the fear, though, or concerns, I should say, looked at essentially three areas. One is extremism spreading within Muslim communities. 56% of respondents registered concern. 1 in 3 respondents said that they feel uncomfortable when they see a Muslim wearing a veil or traditional Islamic attire. 1 in 3 respondents said that they would be concerned about a mosque or Islamic center being built in their neighborhood. 1 in 3 respondents said that they think Muslim Americans should receive extra security screening at the airport. Political ideology was the strongest indicator of negative attitudes. And just to do some comparisons here, it's worth noting that 83% of Republicans were concerned about extremism spreading, compared to 56% overall. 71% of Republicans believe that Islam is not compatible with American values, compared to 42% overall. 60% of Republicans do not agree that Muslim Americans are as patriotic as other Americans. 56% of Republicans would be concerned if a mosque or Islamic center were built in their neighborhood, compared to 33% overall. And what's worth noting here, and we'll get into this in the panel discussion, is while there's certainly stronger views by those who self-identify as Republicans, the concerns that individuals have on a full range of issues span across political party affiliation. There was, in terms of perceived discrimination, we wanted to get a sense of do respondents think that there's discrimination against a set of minorities? And 71% of respondents said that there is discrimination against Muslims. 68% said the same for transgenders, 67% for blacks, and interestingly, 35% said that they perceive that there's discrimination, or a lot of discrimination, against Jews in America. Skepticism about hate crime reporting overall is relatively low, and so a number of advocacy groups have done quite a bit of work on getting out these numbers over the last couple of years, and we were interested. I was surprised to see that these views turned out as they are, so I thought it was a positive sign that we saw so many respondents saying that they thought that they believe that these hate crime reporting reports are accurate. And lastly, well, not lastly, but I should say that one of the interesting things, and we certainly want to get into this in the panel, was we asked an open-ended question, what percentage of America do Muslims represent? And we got 17%. So if you want to put this in perspective, the actual percentage is 1%. And so one of the limits of this kind of survey work is that you can't drill down. This requires additional research. But it's worth noting that 17% is a sizable and incorrect number. But if you couple that with some of the concerns and fears that people have, together that is quite disconcerting. And let me just get in here to comparing between the national sample and the DMV area. This was also, I think our hypothesis was that we would see the DMV area to be more open-minded and more knowledgeable. But let me just take you through some of the figures here. So this is comparing DC with the DMV area with the national sample. So the national sample is the darker color, and the DMV area is the lighter. So there's a lot of discrimination against Jews. The DMV area is more than the national area. Well, it's on par with Muslims in terms of what the national respondents thought and the DMV area. In terms of anti-Semitic hate crimes, again, the numbers are pretty similar. Percentage of population that is Muslim. Interestingly enough, here in the DMV area, respondents thought that Muslims make up 20% of the population. Do you know a Muslim personally? this was another surprise. In the DMV area, 34% said that they personally know a Muslim. Has there been a rise in anti-Muslim hate crimes? It's about the same. And do Muslims contribute significantly or somewhat to the U.S. economy? It's 10% less here in the DMV area. And so, which is interesting, given that the DMV area is highly educated, and it's an area where you have a disproportionate number of doctors, lawyers, attorneys, engineers, and so on. Other interesting comparisons. Are Muslims as patriotic as other Americans? In the DMV area, 10% less. Increase in Muslim candidates is a positive sign. It's about the same. Concern if a mosque or Islamic center is built in your neighborhood, 50% here in the DMV area. Concern about extremism spreading in Muslim communities, 68% in the DMV area compared to 56%. Comfort with Muslims wearing a veil in public or attire, 35%. Should Muslims be subject to extra security screening at the airport? 43%, nearly 10% higher here in the DMV area. And lastly, do you believe that Islam, asking respondents, do they believe that Islam is compatible with American values? It's 50%. So a little bit higher, but as you can see, there are significant differences, and this is what we wanted to know. We didn't know going in. We had some assumptions. I think a number of our assumptions were wrong. But the whole purpose of this study is to try and understand what public perceptions are, but to also see if there are areas where we can influence, or inform rather, policy discussions in a broader public conversation. And so with that, I think we're going to turn it over to the panel discussion now. But I just want to take a minute to thank AMI for their extraordinary work. For those of you in the audience enjoying the food and small bottles of water, this never, you watch these events and you don't realize how much goes on behind the scenes. And so I really want to give a heartfelt thanks to AMI and in no order, Dr. Rahman, Shafiq Khan, Ambassador Islam, and especially Shahid Rahman, who I think we talked maybe 3 times a day for the last month, because there's so much work going into this. And this is just the first step. What we hope to do next is additional research to try and drill down. So thank you for listening. And if you have questions about the study, we can, I think, get into those afterwards in the Q&A, but right now we're going to move to the panel discussion. Yeah.
Is there a clock on the wall? No. Okay. You have a timekeeper?
Yeah, we got just the
Well,
clock.
Oh, there,
Yeah.
oh, there it is. Okay, great. So thank you all for coming to spend your lunch hour with us here to talk about attitudes towards American Muslims. I'm Hannah Lamb from BuzzFeed News. I cover U.S. Muslim life on a national level, and I've worked with or talked to a lot of people in this room. So I really hope that we can have this be a really interactive event. So please keep your questions in mind, and we'll just get started. Thank you both for all this, for the work, and also I want to just take a second to shout out the work that the center here does, because as someone who covers U.S. Muslims, there's not a lot of scholarship and research out there. So these are very valuable tools. Yeah. And I guess the first question I have is, when you set out to do this, sort of where do you hope it goes, and why, when you looked at on those, did the extra sampling in those cities, why were those cities in particular chosen? And so maybe that's for you.
Sure. Well, when New American AMI sat down last summer, one of the things that we recognized is that there's lots of sentiment out there. So you've got some negative sentiment and you've got some positive sentiment. But there's really a lack of scholarship and data. And so we wanted to think about what can we do to put forward scholarship and data that can influence inform a public conversation. We did these 4 cities because we wanted to get a sense. These are 4 very different kinds of cities, and we wanted to get a sense of what's going on at the local level. But we also want to use the findings to put this in the hands of local journalists, elected officials, and policymakers, because they are voices of authority, and they are best positioned to be able to respond to the data and act on it. But when I've heard this in different cities, when Muslim community leaders go to a mayor or a mayor's office and they say, I'm really concerned about X, the mayor is concerned in most cases. But without any data, it's super hard for the mayor to respond. And so this is a helpful step in that direction.
And how do you get the information to them? What comes
Well,
next?
this is AMI and New America working together, doing outreach to journalists, elected officials, and policymakers. And we wanted to do this study in the lead up to the midterm because this is a time when Muslims in many places are punching back.
Right.
And knowing what the general public's views are is super, super helpful. And
well, maybe that's a good part to move to you. I mean,
Sure.
we knowing what the general public thinks is helpful, especially in a measurable way like this, but we kind of knew, right? We had suspicions. What surprised you from the findings? And maybe you could talk a little bit about how AMI plans to use the
Yes, so-
results.
So the first, for us, the first and the most important reason for doing this research was to get data that could be actionable, right? So data that would guide us in terms of connecting with the legislators, connecting with politicians, connecting with the media, and so on and so forth. The surprises were, again, not really expected, but at the same time, if you've ever been in business and done research, your data is always going to inform you and give you some surprises. In our case, part of the reason why we tried to do the 4 other cities was to just get a feel for how different these cities were relative to the rest of the U.S. In fact, as we also saw in the election before, the 2016 historic catastrophe, we also realized that the expectations from pollsters and researchers were all wrong. And here we wanted to do something that was going to give us the best view at the national level, but also at a relatively micro level. And these are not really small cities. I mean, the DMV is very influential.
yeah.
Was that a finding where you were surprised?
I'm sorry, I was shocked.
Yeah.
I was shocked because as individually, I've been thinking and talking about the Washington, D.C. area as one of the most enlightened, or one of the most progressive, one of the most hospitable regions for international people. And that was really a shock. I mean, I'd actually want to go further into why these numbers were what they were.
Just to add to that, Ambassador Salam Shahed and I were at a meeting a few weeks ago in McLean, and we were talking with someone, I don't want to cite them, but from one of the prominent mosques here, and he said, I really don't think you're going to find anything interesting in the DMV area. He says, I think that this is one of the more welcoming areas. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, well, because Tim Kaine's great, Senator Warren's great. And I said, okay, but what does your average man and woman think? We don't know.
Yeah.
And I suspect that senior elected officials are going to be equally concerned about this. And again, my role here at New America is not advocacy, but it's to build a body of scholarship and data. But this is something where AMI, and I have no doubt that senators from Maryland and Virginia are going to want to see this data because it's not what one would expect.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about, and you did in your remarks, about sort of how it seems to be on some level a study in contradictions where 85% of the country is says,
Yeah.
we tolerate Muslims, we welcome
Yeah.
Muslims, we recognize their contributions, except, and yet, we have problems or anxieties about how they dress, where
Yeah.
they worship,
Yeah.
pretty much everything that
Yeah.
makes them the community
Yeah.
they are. So how do you square that?
So, I have another piece of research that I'd like to talk about. In our case, we were very limited. Limitation on time, limitation on money, limitations on resources, and who would conduct this research in this time. So our research was largely about perceptions of Americans of us. Frankly, one of the pieces of research we should do, and we need to do, is perceptions of Muslims on exactly the same questions.
Yeah.
So when you see, and in fact, I'll go back
You mean
to...
Muslim perceptions of fellow...
No, Muslim perceptions of themselves.
Of themselves, right.
So how do we see ourselves as... do we see our values as compatible with American values? So let's look at that one question. It's a very critical question, right?
You might also have Muslims think they're 17% of the population.
That's true too. That's true too. But the point here is, there was a piece of research done quite a while back by the Gallup organization for Unity Productions. It came out as, what do a billion Muslims think? And that was worldwide. The interesting thing was there were perceptions of democracy and women's rights and so on in many Muslim countries that were actually stronger and better than in the US itself. So, I think we do need to look at the gap between the perception of Muslims of themselves, perceptions of Americans of themselves, and then figure out how to bridge the gap. So, for instance, if we believe that, yes, and we do believe that Muslim values are completely compatible with democracy, one could argue that the first democracies started 1,400 years ago. Didn't last very long, but it started there, and that was Muslim values. And then we've ended up in a situation where now this perception is huge. So how do we close that gap? And I think those are some of the things that we're hoping to get out of this.
What do you see in the discrepancy there?
Yeah, I'm doing a survey with Muslim communities in Houston, which I touched on earlier, asking them all of these questions amongst themselves. And that survey will start by asking, what's your religion? And if one doesn't self-identify as Muslim, they're thanked. And the survey continues without them. I think that, and I can tell you, having worked in government and in think tanks and in academia, that we don't know a lot about Muslim communities. I mean, I know the Gallup study well, but there are significant differences within the U.S., within different communities. Even in Houston, the African-American Muslim community is not at all like the Arab Muslim community there. And these are very, very different communities.
And then you have Islam en Espanol.
Yeah, and you've got it. And so we are still dealing with the muscle memory of 9/11. And not having data means that people are making decisions that are not informed by facts. And it's informed by assumptions and sentiment. And the whole purpose of this is to try and get away from that and say, whether we like it or not, here's what the data says. And if somebody else doesn't agree with the findings, that's okay. They can go fund their own survey. We'd like to see more work in this space, not less. Pew's done excellent work on this very topic. But as our friend and scholar here from Pew can attest to, these are super expensive studies.
Right.
But
Well, and that brings me to something. I mean, you were saying that without the data, people are left to their own assumptions, but those assumptions are informed by an entire industry that's sort of set up to, that is well-funded and sophisticated and delivers those assumptions and misinformation. How do you counter that?
You cover these issues, so we hope at some point you will reflect on these findings, but we hope that, in my mind, the three groups of individuals who are best positioned to try and influence public opinion as journalists, elected officials, and policymakers. inform. It doesn't mean they all want to listen. It doesn't mean that
Right.
they're all going to reference this. But just making sure that people are aware of the data sets is super, super important. Otherwise, we're where we currently are, which is you've got some folks who are working with good sentiment saying they're just like us.
Right.
And what does that mean? And then you've got folks on the other side saying we need to be really worried. But what I want to get away from either of those conversations and say, here's what the data shows.
Right.
And I think putting the data in, I'm convinced putting this data in the hands of our senators from Virginia and Maryland. And I spoke with the mayor's office from Charlottesville. She wants to see this.
Well, so on the elected officials front, I mean, it's easy, I guess, to read some of the findings, and when you hear, I think Republicans were, people who identified as Republican in the survey were 1.5 times more likely to have these concerns about how Muslims dress, move through the airport, worship, where they build their mosques, run for office. It's too easy, though, as we've talked about, I think, to see this as a partisan problem, right? Does that let the Democrats off too easy?
No, I mean,
what's
the data
story
bears
behind
us
that?
out. I mean, the data bears us out. And I think that you have a number of, vectors arrayed that have, sort of shaped these views. Hillary Clinton, when talking about violent extremism, often talked about Muslim communities being on the front lines. What does that say about Muslim communities? I mean, you step back and think about that.
Yeah,
and I know she didn't mean that in a way that was, I don't think she meant that in a derogatory way, but like, if Muslim communities are on the front lines, what does that suggest is happening at the local level with Muslim communities in the U.S.?
That the default sort of view
That's
is
right.
always through a national
And this is
security
somebody
lens.
who's nuanced and thoughtful. And so, and if this is coming from her, and we can point to a bunch of other examples. And I'm using that just one example, but on top of that, we had 36 governors who said they didn't want to take in refugees. So when you have voices of authority who are saying, I'm worried about refugees, but specifically Muslim refugees coming here from Syria, you have average Americans who are looking to them, and their own views are being shaped by this. So it is far more complicated than just Republicans or Democrats. But I think there's no escaping the muscle memory we have from 9/11. And so, the best we can do is try and, do these kinds of projects to try and see what's going out there, to see what kind of concerns they have. And I should add that, to steal some of Shafiq's, thunder here, is that one of the points that he pushed is he didn't want to just do another survey. He wanted us to do everything we can to understand what kinds of people have what kinds of misinformation and fears, so that we could think about, that they could think about how to potentially engage those communities.
So is it worth engaging with the Republicans? Can you? Are you? What would that look like?
Yeah.
Because it would seem that, if the numbers, show that that's
so
where
let's
the biggest problem.
for a while forget about Republicans and Democrats and just go into the data, not necessarily from this report, but others too that have happened, and look at the perceptions of Muslims within certain segments of population. So there's a report, I can't exactly tell you which one it is, that talks about the top fifth percentiles of people who had the worst opinion of Muslims didn't know any Muslims. 80% of them had not met a Muslim. They did not know a Muslim. And perhaps the rest didn't know very many. So when you get something like that, and we as a national organization, AMI's objective is both to work with the community, within the community, but also outside with media, with legislators, with thought leaders, with interfaith leaders. You actually say, why? And in our case, the why is also because, frankly, many of us come from communities that were fairly established, and we come in here and pretty much go into our own cocoon. We only connect with our own, and we don't end up, making ourselves known to our neighbors. And as soon as people know us, in fact, I think I've seen a study, wish I could recall that better, that talked about people who actually had Muslims working for them or Muslims as their bosses ended up having the most favorable perception. Right? So that actually establishes something for us to do as a community.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. I mean,
Yeah.
since 9/11, it seems that groups like yours and
Yeah.
many others have been on almost a nonstop charm offensive. I mean, condemning and apologizing and issuing statements and inviting to mosques. And you all just had, I
Yeah.
think, a block party, right, to invite neighbors to
Yes,
to
yes.
show. I mean, so what else can Muslims do?
But
And
I think,
yeah.
to be honest, we've not done it as well as we should. And we haven't done it enough. Frankly, I haven't done a block party in my neighborhood, right? And I should. But at the end of the day, I think these are the kinds of things. Interfaith, there's a lot more interfaith work happening. I mean, AMI is actually conducting a lot of it, which is wonderful. And every time we do it, it seems to, really make a difference. And there are people coming to you at the end of it who are telling you that they have a perception now that's significantly better and improved. So I think we just need to make sure that we use research like this to work both within the influence makers and also within our own community and use it for, again, connecting better, making our image better.
What do you say to young, there is, I mean, I've noticed in my reporting a strain, kind of a refrain among younger Muslims especially saying, we're done with the condemning and the apologizing and
Yeah.
everything, and we're tired of, we know there's a willful blindness that we recognize now.
Yeah.
And maybe that's even reflected somewhat
Yeah.
in their, how do you, who's gettable and who's not, and where do you?
To some degree, I think it's a question of engaging.
Yeah.
Right? And engaging in the one very, very heartening thing that I see is the political arena. 100 people running, as you said, Bobby. In our county, Montgomery County, there are lots of people here who actually do a lot of political work. And we had 7 people run this year, which is actually 7 more than most other elections. And of the 7, the 3 that got elected. Now that engagement was fantastic. And the one thing that to me was most heartening was the fact that instead of cowering and shrinking and walking away, they actually went straight in. And I think that's where they need organizations like ours to actually pave the way for them to do more of that. I think on the political front, we've not really talked about AMI doing very much there, other than connecting with the establishment that exists. But perhaps that's a role for AMI to play in the future in terms of just promoting and helping Muslims get elected nationally. There are other organizations that do that.
Sure.
So
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, Bobby, when when you look at, I guess when you look at the midterms and this, I mean, it's really unprecedented, this number of Muslim candidates across the board at all levels. I mean, are you seeing people emerge that you think have staying power? Do you think this is a flash in the pan moment? What do you
No,
think?
I don't. I mean, I think that this is a moment that I suspect we will look back upon where people say, 20 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to hear folks say, it was, I was 15 and I heard the president say X about my community. And I decided then that I wanted to be a U.S. senator, and that's why I'm now a U.S. senator. I mean, I suspect that's coming, but it's down the road. Yeah, I mean, that's my impression. But I everywhere I've traveled, and I'm from Southeast Michigan, which has a very large Muslim community and a very large Arab Christian community. And people are fired up and getting involved. Doesn't mean everybody. And there are different ideas about what engagement and involvement looks like, but you have people getting involved. Here in D.C., I didn't realize this, but AMI told me that there's something like 70 organizations here that are Muslim-led or Muslim-run. I mean, some of them are small, but I mean, the point is that ain't nothing. And so you've got, I think, a lot of activity going on, and I think it's only going to grow, but it takes time. I think that, I travel all over the country, and if you go to any mosque on a Friday for Jummah prayer, they can raise an enormous amount of money for disaster relief overseas. I mean, it's eye-popping.
And here,
Yeah.
and domestic.
I mean,
right.
that's, I mean, they can raise hundreds of thousands of
Just for
dollars.
Pittsburgh.
Right.
They can also raise, to a far lesser extent, for political activity, and for an even lesser extent for this kind of research activity. But I think all of that is changing, because I think people realize if they don't want to get involved, then they're going to have to see the reports about them on CNN or Fox News or whatever that are either uninformed or misinformed. And not always, but
Thanks.
but there's I think so. No, I don't think this is a flash in the pan at all. I think that, I mean, I think the real lemons to lemonade here is that you're going to see a community that is engaging. And I can tell you in Atlanta specifically, you've got the community engaging other minority communities there that they didn't even know about 5 years ago. And now they do regular meetings.
Yeah.
And so that to me is a huge positive. But
I
think
used to get a lot of press releases and things about, a poetry night or something, and I get them for Mother of All Phone Banks was one I got yesterday, about from Muslim groups.
I just want to follow up with one other point, which is important here, because there's no question that there were significant differences between the different party affiliations. But one of the things that we will do is engage with folks on both sides of the aisle, just to, at a minimum, to make sure that they have this data, because I regularly brief members up on the Hill and their staff, and my impression is, not with everybody, but with many members, they want more data. They want to see this kind of data because they don't know. So that is certainly something we'll be doing.
That's great. Should we
Yeah.
open to questions? Anybody have any questions? Sir?
I have a comment first.
One second, we've got microphones
Oh, yes,
coming.
let me, Please, this is being live streamed and recorded,
Mic.
so we're going to wait until we get mics for everyone. Here we go. Thank you.
Thank you. This was an excellent report, and I'm delighted that AMI and New America have partnered in this effort, because it's a very necessary first step. And I say first step because clearly from your own discussion, it's evident that much more needs to be done to unpack some of the findings, as well as to create new bases for going forward, including the idea of polling the American Muslim community itself. Just one comment first. I think there's already debate about the actual size of the Muslim community in the United States. The figure that Bobby used is the lower figure. There are other figures out there that are 3 or 4 times that, and even President Obama used a much higher figure. So maybe we can try and get a little more clarity on that at some point, on the total number of Muslims in America. Before
Good
we
luck.
start
Good
examining...
luck on that. Good luck on that one.
before we
There's some
start-
pollsters in here I know I've talked to about that, and it is extremely difficult.
Before we start examining what Muslims think about themselves. Secondly, the question I have is about the demographic breakdown in terms of age groups of the respondents
Very
to
good
this
point.
survey, as well as to the one that you plan for the American Muslims. I think it's critical to differentiate between the first generation American immigrant of Muslim origin and their children. And there are people in this room who have entered politics, who have served in the Obama administration, for instance, who are the new vanguard, I think, in this. And it'd be very critical to try and get from them a sense of how they perceive their role, and which are the professions that they are choosing, as opposed to which are the professions that their parents are choosing. So from my point of view, I'd like to know a little bit more about that as we go forward. Thank you.
Do you see that? Do you see that changing? Do you see, sort of our aunties and uncles becoming more supportive of going into journalism or to politics or to, different fields where there can be?
Yeah, I absolutely. When you think about the composition of the board of AMI, it's regrettably aunties and uncles. But the thing is,
Okay.
thank you, Tariq.
Says the
Thank
millennial
you.
in the back. Okay.
Thank you, thank you. You're the exception that proves the rule. But the fact is, I think we should not also downplay the role of the aunties and uncles, and actually addressing these issues, stepping up to them. Now, I think we've got to get the younger generation to step up with us as well, and I think it is. So in the future, I expect that there will be far greater participation and also perhaps more effective participation just because they are better able to engage with the mainstream.
But do you see change among the Muslim families and community? Do you see real change about encouraging young people to run, supporting them to step out into maybe roles that traditionally our parents' generation sort of said no?
The answer is yes, but not enough.
Okay,
So my answer would be not enough, but yes.
great. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Yusra Ghazi with America Indivisible here in DC, and thank you all for presenting this really phenomenal set of findings from your survey. One of our partner organizations, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, ISPU, as part of their annual American Muslim poll, which they do try to get a sense of what American Muslims think, they found, I think in the most recent one, that compared to all other communities, Muslims had the highest more than any other group, they felt most negative attitudes towards other Muslims, that other Muslims would be likely to commit negative actions. And so I think they made the connection, they're trying to, in their writing about this finding, have made the connection between the ways that media and media pollution about Muslim Americans impacts non-Muslims and Muslims and creates internalized Islamophobia as well. So I wonder if in your findings, in any demographic profiles you've been able to put together on the respondents, are you also taking a look at media consumption in addition to the existence of or the lack of relationships with Muslim people? Are you also looking at where they get their information about Muslim Americans?
That news source was on the poll.
Yeah,
right?
we do.
Yeah.
We ask respondents where they get their media from. Yeah, so we definitely wanted to see that. So.
And there was a range of response because I remember it
Yeah.
was, MSNBC and Breitbart. There were, those were all on there.
Yeah.
Let's see, maybe on this side. Yes.
Hi, I'm Walter Ruby from the Greater Washington Muslim Jewish Forum. I'm fascinated by this high level of Islamophobia aspects of it in DC, and it evoked for me a survey, and I don't remember which survey, and I don't exactly what year, but it might have been 20 years or more ago when I was covering, I was working for a Jewish newspaper on Long Island, among others, and we were all shocked by a poll, maybe it was from the ADL, I'm not sure now, that showed a high incident, a strikingly high incidence of anti-Semitism on Long Island, which of course has quite a large Jewish community, maybe 20, 25%, not sure, don't remember the numbers, but so the question was, so that is somehow that what you just said now evokes that in me, that perhaps sometimes you may have situations where people, for example, and what I was remember thinking at the time was some people were saying, well, I've got lots of Jewish friends, and I know, so I sort of almost feel free to sort of say that I don't like, that I'm uncomfortable with this or that aspect, because I'm not anti-Jewish, or something like that. And I'm just wondering, and maybe just to follow up also on the other cities that you talked about, which I think are also have fairly large Muslim communities, did you see a higher incidence perhaps of some of these things than you might have seen in Kansas or somewhere else?
Bobby?
Yeah, I mean, these are great questions. I mean, Hannah and I were talking yesterday. I mean, I'm from Southeast Michigan, and we did not do an oversampling of greater Southeast Michigan, but I'm pretty convinced that familiarity does not always breed better relations. Mm-hmm. I mean, what I hear anecdotally in Southeast Michigan from non-Muslims is, why don't they learn the language? Mm-hmm. Why do they want halal lunches in the schools? Why can't they fit in?
One step above a no-go zone.
That's right. And a place where you have, again, a bunch of doctors, lawyers, engineers. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a mix of backgrounds, but the point is, so I'm pretty convinced of that, and the next round of research will want to look at that. But we're going to be rolling out the findings for Houston and Tampa and Orlando, and we already know in a preliminary way, Houston is not fantastic. Orlando is not fantastic. Tampa's a little bit better. So.
And Bobby, you've done some work with Houston fairly extensively in the last year and a half, right?
Yes.
What kinds of stuff, what are you doing down there?
Well, we're doing a major study looking at what the Muslim community looks like, breakdown by community, and we're doing a survey with Muslims to ask them very similar questions. You know, how patriotic do you think, how patriotic are you relative to other communities? And we're asking these questions, and my hypothesis is that we're going to see positive results. But the whole point of this is to have results on both sides, so you can see what do non-Muslims think, but also what do Muslims think, because we don't know.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of guessing.
And then, also there's the risk, I think, because we've all talked about lumping, what do Muslims think?
Yeah.
And, that is, it's something that we talk about a lot in news, not presenting this sort of one big, one population that doesn't have all these diverse communities within it.
In Houston, there's one community that built a very big mosque, and they had problems with pig races on Fridays when they were building this mosque. And until it was covered by the media, not many people knew about it. But this is a minority Muslim community within the bigger, and so they didn't share this with other Muslims. So folks didn't know about this until the Houston Chronicle covered it. And so there's an awful lot happening at the local level that I think people just assume that it's a Muslim community, everyone knows. They don't know. I mean, so we want to try and better understand what's going on.
Great. Let's get a couple more questions in the back there.
On the right as well.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Leila Rawa. I'm with The Tempest. So my question specifically relates to the definition of Muslim in this survey. Black Muslims have been in DC from day one. They actually arguably have the first mosque here in DC. Yeah. So when we're talking about first-gen Muslims and the children of those, Muslims, that's the immigrant population. And so I'm wondering if that nuance is going to be reflected in future surveys, because, we have Muhammad Ali being praised by our president, but he's also Muslim, and he's black. So that kind of is a different dichotomy. So that's kind of my question, because I feel like this, I'm an immigrant Muslim, so obviously I'm biased, but, there's just been a lot of focus on the normal definition of Muslims in America, which is immigrant, not black Muslims.
Just 2 points. The survey asks the general public their views on Muslims, and if we were to get into these nuances, I think we're going to lose them pretty quickly, and I think our friend and scholar from Pew could probably answer this better than I. And when we're doing the survey in Houston among Muslims, we do ask, though, how do they self-identify? We don't ask. We're not concerned about their, how religious they are, but what we're concerned about is, do they self-identify as Muslim? And that's sort of the cutoff.
I did wonder when there was, something like, what was it, 34% of people here in the DMV said they didn't know a Muslim. And I do wonder how much that is where you see the erasure. Like, did you not know Abdul down the street is Muslim? Do you not know? Because the image that you're fed every day of a Muslim is my family, let's see. Sure.
The Pew Research Center. I was just curious, you talked a little bit about the partisan splits in some of these views. Did you capture any differences by religious group or like religious affiliation or lack of affiliation, where people who are more religious or who are identified as evangelical Christian or something more or less?
Yeah, so we asked a set of questions on this. So we asked people to self-identify, and we have, we listed quite a few religions, so not just the major religions, are you Baha'i? We went through the list, just all the way through it. We also asked individuals to self-identify how religious they would describe themselves. We also asked how often do they go to church or temple or some house of worship. So we
we do ask these questions.
Great. Right there.
Let me just, one other thing so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be posting all of the data online at New America so that others can look at this and make, if they want to contest our findings, they can go out and do their own survey, and we would welcome that. But the whole purpose of this is to make this as transparent as possible, and we want it to be publicly available so that it's useful to folks such as yourself and your colleagues over at Pew and elsewhere.
There's a question here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hi, my name is Sophie Herscher. I'm here representing the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism and Reform Judaism writ large, which is the largest denomination of Judaism in North America. And I'm wondering how you see the implications or the opportunities for non-Muslim institutions and organizations to help get this information out there, to help act in partnership and act in friendship. What can we be doing to support the very diverse and very complicated Muslim community within our own communities?
Yeah.
AMI is very big on interfaith
Yes,
work, right? Why don't
yes.
you talk about that?
I see that as a key opportunity for us. And I also see, I was actually shocked also to get some research recently that said perceptions of Jews were not very positive either. In fact, the gap between perceptions of Muslims and perceptions of Jews were relatively similar. And it was like, that is a big issue. And I think it speaks to us needing to partner and needing to address this together. Perhaps the issues underlying negative perception of Muslims and negative perceptions of Jews are different, but at the end of the day, I think we need to understand them well. And perhaps to the extent we can jointly address them, great. To the extent we can individually address them or learn from each other, we should, absolutely should. Because at the end of the day, when you think about hate and negative perceptions, they are actually really bad for the country. They're bad for the world. I mean, if we were just a family and we had everybody hating each other, how would the family function? And at the end of the day, the world is a family too. So I think we need to figure this out, and we need to work with other organizations effectively.
Just to follow up on, I think, on your terrific point, I'm doing quite a bit of work here looking at online hate, and the research is increasingly clear that online, the folks who don't like Jews, don't like Muslims or blacks or gays, these folks online are pretty aggressive going after many minority communities. And my assumption is that in the real world, it's not dissimilar, I mean, on the ground. So I think it's a hugely important point. But I think this is also one of the things we're seeing coming out of this particular environment, is that you see, I mean, I know what's going on in Atlanta, I know what's going on in Houston. You have communities that are engaging that would not have been engaging, not for any negative reason. There wouldn't have been, I think, the energy to do so 5 years ago. But now I think folks are seeing that, well, guess what? You've got a swastika spray painted on a synagogue. You've got someone throwing a pig's head through a mosque window. I mean, this is beyond the pale. And so you see communities coming together. And I think AMI is doing terrific work on this front.
And it was interesting. One of the findings showed that gap between, that that Americans recognize a clear discrimination against Black people, Muslims, transgender people, but then it fell off for anti-Jewish sort of discrimination. That was interesting.
As chairman of AMI, I see what are our responsibility now after you people have done this fantastic research. And I'm amazed with the propensity of data going against or not in favor of the Muslims. That's also a very disappointing situation, even though the Muslims are trying their best to be part of the American culture, American strata, American dream, whatever you call it. I think for us there are two challenges. One is our representation in the media is practically zero. So general American population hears the word Islam or Muslim in 2 months or 3 months, and that too by the passing way. There is no commentator on the media or the TV stations, or Washington Post, or New York Times. That's a big gulf what we have. The second thing what I'm thinking loud is our mosques are not doing the job what they should be doing. When we get in that 4 walls, or when we get in that environment, we become very much constrained to the religion and not that much open to the outside world. And I guess what we have to do as AMI and with lot of Muslim other organizations together to really open up the dimension of the mosque, not make them only a prayer place, make them on every kind of activity which you can go there and interact. And I guess that would be a challenge which we have to take, not New America, but we have to take that challenge. Thank you.
So more media representation and opening the mosques up to.
I would add, though, we have a fantastic journalist that I know of that sits on the stage with us right now. Who's,
Well, thank you. And I would add that I do have to take issue that that's actually an exciting point. We are getting a lot more representation,
Yes.
and even major publications now with beats dedicated to that, or at least really covering, at least committed to covering Muslims in a more nuanced way. But yes, right now we're all drinking from a fire hose. And
Yeah, and
trying
I mean,
to
we
make
have,
sure.
I mean, there's just to add one more point, we have one person, I think he's here today, that he set up this great project called Muslim Marine, and Muslim Marine, but I mentioned this, I don't know.
Oh, the Muslim Marine
Yeah, he's
project.
here. Where is he
Yeah.
at? Can you just raise your hand if you're here?
There he is.
So anyhow, there's lots of interesting projects going on out
Yeah.
there. It's just,
This was where during Ramadan, right, you were matching Marines to, just to go, Muslim service members to go and have iftar with, right. Yeah, I think you got a nice write-up on that in Washington Post or something. We have time
do
for
a round of applause for the gentleman.
Yeah, absolutely. As the sister of 2 Muslim Marines, Ahmed and Mohammed, I took special notice of your program. Let's see here, or right here. You did. Yes.
Hi, my name is Dr. Tazeen Hashmi, and I, Bobby, by the way, went to high school in Detroit.
Okay.
About
Where at? Let me just...
Cass Tech High School in
Okay.
downtown. And I have recently started working in Baltimore with Institute of Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies, ICJS, as what you were referring to a little while ago. What I wanted to say was that what I have noticed is that before September 11th, there was a positive curiosity about Muslims and less engagement by Muslims. Since then, there is, I would say, 1,000-fold more engagement by Muslims, but negative curiosity. So no matter how much we engage, I am part of that generation which is fatigued of working, trying to be my own advocate. It has come, and my children, they all have come to a point where they are not interested in doing that. I think the bully pulpit is with the politicians, with the media, and a group like AMI is actually where, as Muslims, we need to now become organized and support studies like this. So what you were saying, that mayors and senators and congressmen would be interested in these studies because we are their constituents, and support organizations to produce data so that somebody on our behalf who have bully pulpit can speak for us, because really there is a fatigue amongst Muslims who have been doing a lot of work, but we really don't see it going anywhere.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Answers
How
your
do you,
question.
yeah,
Yeah.
we talked a little bit about that. But I mean, how do you combat that fatigue? I mean, how do you?
I wish I had the answer.
Yeah, that's we'd
yeah.
all be out there doing it. Yes. Maybe we have time for probably yours and maybe one more quick one.
Saif Rahman from Dar al-Hijra Islamic Center. Bobby, 2 quick questions. Is there anything that shocked you when you were doing this? And the second question is, what would be, we've got Senator Kaine coming to Dar al-Hijra tomorrow, for example. What would be a policy recommendation coming out of this for our politicians that we should be adopting?
Great. Okay. Good questions. A couple of things that I wouldn't say shocked me, but were surprising is one that a disproportionate number of respondents don't believe that there's discrimination against Jews. I thought that was pretty troubling. The other thing was just the discrepancy between the views in the DMV area on so many issues relative to the national area. I mean, I can't. We were just at an event in McLean, and someone told me from another center, no, everything is essentially under control here. And I said, okay, let's see what the study says. So those were the two things. I think that you should hand the senator the one page that just shows the difference between the DMV area and the national area. I mean, I don't just showing him a couple of those points because I suspect the senator will be surprised to hear this and disappointed, frankly. And just to be clear, by putting this data in journalists' hands or elected officials' hands or policymakers' hands doesn't mean that they're jumping in front of a camera right away to talk about this. But when these issues come up, they can at least address them in an informed way and say, and also to their own staff, like maybe we need to do a better job when we're at non-Muslim events, maybe reflecting that our Muslim brothers and sisters are also contributing here. And so I think that the response to this is nuanced and but super important. But I just think the one page, which we can get to you, is and we're working on pulling together some information because we're going to have. I mean, there's hundreds of pages of crosstabs and banners, which is not going to be useful to anyone, frankly, here other than our Bashir.
Okay,
but
we have to wrap up.
Yep.
Let's
Sure.
see. Is there any other questions?
Question on this side.
Okay, one here and one there. Let's do them pretty quick if we can. We only have a couple minutes left. Did you want to start? And we'll let you have the last word.
Hi, I'm Margaret Johnson. I'm with the Ezra Blue Mosque in Fairfax, Virginia, the Institute for Islamic and Turkish Studies, and I really want to commend you guys, New America and AMI, on doing this really important work. Thank you so much. And I have several questions for you and comments, but I'll just ask you one, and that is, can you draw a clear through line? What is your thinking about, you said you wanted to release this right before the elections. Like, what is the dynamic that you're hoping for? Is it that this is going to increase Muslim voter turnout, or what is the thinking there?
I wanted to be clear. We wanted to conduct this in the lead up to the elections, and when we released it was just based on availability. So I'm not doing advocacy for either party. What we wanted to do was try and capture the general public's views on Muslim Americans in the lead up to the election. That was the key thing. That we're doing the event today as opposed to November 10th was just a matter of scheduling. Yeah.
And right here, maybe for the last question.
Actually, can we?
Very quickly,
Was
first
there
of all,
one more?
thank
Oh,
you for the
sorry,
excellent
didn't see.
work. I hope that this is going to be the first step in many more important things we can do together. My question is, this is just one particular question that really struck me as odd. This was about when you asked people if they personally know a Muslim, the percent of people who said yes just defies logic to me. And I wonder how the question was framed and whether some people think that they've heard of Muhammad bin Salman, so they personally know a Muslim. If there was some confusion about that.
Or conversely, they knew a Turkish guy down the street and didn't know he was Muslim.
Yeah, the short answer to that is that we commissioned this with a firm called SSRS, and they do lots of work in this space. They test, the survey. That the way we're going to send all this out. It will be up online as well. So I can't tell you what's in someone's head when they answered that. But that's what respondents said. That's all we know.
And that was how it was asked. It was asked that way. It wasn't.
Yeah. I will, but I mean, it's essentially, do you personally know a Muslim? And let me just add one small point. I know we have to wrap up here in 2 minutes. Is that what the survey doesn't? There's a lot of other things that the survey doesn't get at. I'll just give you an example. I was at a dinner in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a couple of months ago, at a Muslim family's home. And we were talking about these kinds of issues. And the wife, who's not veiled, who's a cardiologist, overheard one of her colleagues saying something pretty nasty about Muslims. And this is someone she's worked with for 5 years. And she says to her colleague, do you know I'm Muslim? And the colleague said, no, I didn't realize that. And then she said,
All the
do you
time.
know that what you've just said is
All the time.
offensive? And the colleague said, I'm sorry, but I didn't, you're not like them, was her response. And so,
Again, classic.
there's a
Yeah.
limit
That's
to
classic.
what this kind of research can do.
Yeah.
And so we can follow up on that, but I think we have one final
Okay,
question.
final.
So it's more of a.
Do you want to use the microphone?
Oh, here, can you use the mic, please, for the recording?
Al-Azhar Bloom Mosque asked, and I think your question is very good, except we are the same way by being a 501c3. We are not in advocacy, but we felt the focus on Muslim issues, especially what Bobby said, Muslims being the punching bag in 2016 election cycle, 2018 is no different. Not only Muslims, all minorities, in this case, people of color. So what we want to do is time this release of this study. Hopefully the people, journalists in the room and media will pick up some of the results and publicize this, and this is the thinking. But I think I want to say one thing. We have work cut out for us, especially all of you who are, including myself, from the Washington, D.C. area. It's eye-opening what the results are, the double-digit increase in the perceptions, negative perceptions, Muslims in the D.C. metro area. So I think we have work cut out. One thing we'll do is we'll definitely share these results with all the area mosques and Islamic community centers and all this. Secondly, Bobby and I think we would like to see a joint letter, cover letter going out and make copies available of this report to all members of Congress, the U.S. Senate and Congress, and especially if after the election have the new members joining Congress. So the next Congress, we should be supplying 535 copies of this, one copy to each member of Congress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and where can they find the report?
You can find the report online, newamerika.org, the Muslim Diaspora Initiative.
All right, thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.